The New York Giants start their mandatory minicamp on Tuesday. What are some of the key storylines we'll be watching, and what are the expectations? I break all that down with Ed Valentine of Big Blue View on today's Locked On Giants podcast. That's coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI. Find our written work at si.com/NFL/Giants. And welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's episode, the Giants begin a 2-day mandatory minicamp. It starts on Tuesday, goes through Wednesday, and then there's like a half day on Thursday, but that's more or less not a practice, and that's closed to the media. But here to help me break down some of the stories, the key storylines, what we'll be watching, and the remaining questions that maybe won't get answered in this minicamp is good friend Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. Ed, welcome as always into the program.
How you doing, Patty? Nice to be with you again.
Yes, I feel like you've never left.
Yeah, this is true. Maybe I never have really left, Patty.
It's all good. It's all good. My listeners love you. I love you. So what more do what more do you want? But anyway, All right, Ed. Giants mandatory minicamp. Obviously, going into this, one of the big questions was Darren Waller and what decision he would end up making. We all kind of knew it was trending towards him retiring. The decision came out and was made yesterday, kind of when I expected it to be made, because, if players have to report if they're under contract to the mandatory camp, unless excused. But that being said, let's start there if we could. And how does how this whole story having unfolded the way it did, what effect do you think this has on the team, both from a personnel standpoint versus how the Giants handled it?
Patty, I don't think it really has a whole lot of impact on the Giants, from a personnel standpoint at all. I think that they have been preparing for this throughout the offseason. Now, they don't have an established pass-catching tight end who's got the resume of Darren Waller, on the roster any longer, but they drafted Theo Johnson. They signed 2 veteran inline blocking tight ends, something they did not have on the roster last year, in Chris Manhertz and Jack Stoll. I think they've been operating on the assumption that Waller wasn't going to play for most of the offseason. Whether he had indicated that or whether they just sort of read the tea leaves, I don't know, but it seems to me that that's how they've been operating. As far as how they handled it, I don't know if you or your listeners and your viewers got an opportunity to watch the video that Waller put out on YouTube on Sunday night, but that gives you a glimpse into what Darren Waller is. He's a very insecure man. He's he's battled addiction throughout his life. He's fought his way to sobriety. Good for him. We hope that continues for him. He spoke a lot in that video about doing things to please other people. And, fingers crossed for him that he finds what it is that makes him happy in life, that he finds peace, that he finds, as I said, whatever it is that he's looking for. In terms of how the Giants handled this, it would have been nice to know before the draft. It would have been nice to know a while ago. But I think, as I said, I think the Giants assumed that this is where it was going. I think, considering what we know about Darren Waller, and I think what the Giants knew about Waller, just his personal situation, all of that, I think they handled it as well as they could have. They allowed him space to do this, to do it on his own time, to make the decision on his own time. And I think you're right. I think it was going to come down before mandatory minicamp. And I pretty much think they always knew how it was going to come down, Patty. Look at the cap space. They had barely over $1 million in cap space, and they didn't do anything about it because they knew there was $12 million of Darren Waller money coming. So I think they handled it as well as they could have, pressuring him, publicly saying, we need an answer. It wasn't going to accomplish anything. So I think they handled it the best way they could.
Agree. All right. And let's turn to the players who are on the roster. One of the big storylines I know a lot of people are going to be interested in is the offensive line, but we really won't be able to tell a whole lot until the pads go on. Right now, Carmen Bricillo, the new offensive line coach, is pretty much, stressing versatility amongst his offensive linemen. But what do you hope to learn about that unit that maybe you didn't learn in the 3 OTAs that were open to the media, by the time this mini camp is over?
Well, Patty, the biggest thing that I want to learn, that I want to see, is I want to know what's going on with Evan Neal at this point. I mean, obviously everybody wants to know, what the situation is with Evan Neal. Obviously missed a good chunk of last season, had ankle surgery, hasn't been doing any team periods during the OTAs. Last week at the OTA, he didn't even do the walkthroughs. So, Evan Neal's a young man who needs reps. He needs to get on the field if he's going to ever have an opportunity to become at least an adequate right tackle in the NFL. And if he can't get on the field again, over the next couple days, that's going to bother me a little bit. The reps, as I said, are a big thing. And what Carmen Bricillo has been asked a couple times, when do you want to have the group settled? And we know, you and I have talked about the fact that they didn't settle anything early enough last year. And I just want to know how long they're going to go. If Neal can't get on the field, how long they're going to go before they just cut the cord and say, we can't continue to wait, and move Illuminor to right tackle and set up a guard competition and leave it at that.
Yeah, that's a big storyline. I mean, I was surprised that Neal wasn't even in warm-ups last week. And I thought, okay, was it load management? Was it, did he have a setback? What's going on there? So that is definitely something to keep an eye on. Ed, another thing I think to keep an eye on, and tell me if you agree, Daniel Jones. All right, now he's been doing 7-on-7. He's been doing individuals, and he's been working against air. He is not expected to work in 11-on-11s, which means we'll get to see a healthy dose of Drew Lock running the offense, I would think. Last Friday, the Giants only ran one 11-on-11 period, as was reported. We weren't there, of course, because we weren't allowed in. But what do you want to see from Drew Lock as he takes probably the bulk of those 11-on-11 snaps in this minicamp?
Patty, that wasn't you that I saw peeking behind the fence on Friday?
Nah.
That wasn't you? Oh, well.
Well, if it was, I'm not going to tell you.
Okay. I'm not telling anybody that I was there peeking behind the fence either. But Brian Daboll did leave the door open for Jones to do some 11-on-11 in mandatory minicamp. I would be very surprised if he did. But he did leave that door open, and I suppose that's the right thing for Daboll to do. Jones, to me, has a little bit of an edge to him this spring that I don't think we've seen before. You could tell in some of his comments. To me, I even see it on the field a little bit, not in terms of how he's interacting with his teammates, but the other day when we at the OTA, he would throw and then he would go run. Then he would go run some sprints. He's moving, he's running, and he's throwing the ball with some zip. He's throwing the ball with a little bit of velocity behind it. I'm curious to see if the Giants give him a taste of 11 on 11. I don't think they will. But I think, like I said, he's been playing with some edge. He's been moving. He moved pretty well the other day, going left and right too, as well, which I thought was encouraging. As for Drew Lock, I thought he was better last week than he was the first time I saw him. I've only been to 2 of the OTAs. I was at the first one with media access. I thought Lock was better. I think he was 13 of 16 the other day, although I did get a chuckle out of one of those sessions, one of those 11 on 11 sessions, because he went 5 for 5. And all 5 of those throws were tremendous catches by wide receivers. 2 diving catches, 1 tremendous catch by Malik Neighbors, a one-handed catch by, I think it was Theo Johnson, and a contested catch, I think, by Darius Slayton in the corner of the end zone. And I was like, he could have easily been over 5. But, for me, the quarterback story is how much they let Daniel Jones do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right. We've got more coming up with Ed Valentine, a Big Blue View. Don't go anywhere as we get you ready for Giants mandatory minicamp, which starts Tuesday. Hey, Giant fans, summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet on it all on FanDuel. No matter what you're into, you'll find something that matches your interests and a whole host of odds, stat lines, money lines, and so much more to bet on when you hook up with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, when you sign up for an account with FanDuel, you'll get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 to bet on everything from the finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traynor, with special guest Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, and we are getting you ready for the New York Giants mandatory minicamp, the last activity of the spring before we go off on a 6-week break, and then it's training camp. And of course, here on the Locked On Giants podcast, I'll have for you daily reports just as soon as I can get them ready and out to you. So those are coming. And of course, make sure you're following my written work over on New York Giants on SI.com. You can find it at si.com/NFL/Giants. And Ed Valentine will also be covering the camp on Big Blue View. So make sure you're checking his workout as well. Ed, let's continue our discussion about storylines. Specifically, the Giants got a lot of receivers again this year. Maybe not as many as they had last year, but, a different kind of mix this year. And we all kind of know that it's going to be Malik Neighbors and it's going to be everybody else. How do you think that whole receiver group may, play out as far as, we figured Darius Slayton's going to be in there. Wan'Dale Robinson will probably be in there. Jalen Hyatt will probably look for a piece of the pie. But after that, it's a toss up. How do you kind of see that playing out?
Well, Patty, first, let me say this. In the time that I've been covering the Giants, there are 3 players that you've been able to watch practice where you watch even a one-on-one or an individual drill and you say, that guy just looks different than anybody else when he moves around. One was Saquon Barkley, rookie Saquon Barkley, pre-injury Saquon Barkley. 2 was Odell Beckham. It just looked different when Beckham was on the field, even in shorts and t-shirts in a practice. And right now, Malik Neighbors is 3. It just looks different when the man runs around on the football field. It looks different than anybody else. I mean, we'll see how that translates, but fingers crossed it translates into something really, really good for the Giants offense. But that wide receiver group as a whole, you're right, Patty. It's Neighbors, it's Hyatt, it's Wan'Dale Robinson, and it's Darius Slayton. And then after that, I'm not sure who else is going to make that group. I mean, you can make an argument for Isaiah Hodgins. You can make an argument for Gunnar Olszewski because of punt return. You can make an argument for Isaiah McKenzie because of his long-term connection to Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. You can make an argument if he can do what he did last year. You can probably make an argument for Bryce Ford Wheaton. You can probably make an argument for Allen Robinson. It depends on what they want. Are they going to keep 6? Are they going to keep 7? It is one of the most interesting competitions of the summer, and I'm pretty much throwing my hands up, Patty, because I have no idea. I wouldn't be surprised, by the way. I know everybody hangs on to favorite players, and they hang on to guys when they do things well. But I'm not going to be shocked if Isaiah Hodgins gets the short straw here. I'm really not.
Yeah, me too.
He got a reduced role last year, which never really got explained, but I think kind of tells you what the coaching staff really thinks of Isaiah Hodgins' upside. It won't surprise me if he gets the short straw.
Plus, he was also, if I remember correctly, he was also re-signed kind of late in the process. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of telling. But yeah, I agree with you on that. So Ed, on offense, like I said, you have Malik Neighbors and you kind of have everybody else. How much pressure is this kid under? Because, in the past, when you just had one threat that really defensive coordinators had a plan for, the minute they figured out how to stop that one threat, it was downhill from there, whether it be Saquon or before him, Odell Beckham Jr. This year, there is no more Saquon. Odell's not here, obviously. It's Malik Neighbors. But who can be, in your mind, that guy who can maybe step up and give opposing defenses something to think about this season?
Well, Patty, beyond Neighbors, and by the way, for Neighbors, I don't know that Neighbors really feels like he's under any pressure at all. Look at it this way. Most of these young kids don't know what they don't know. All right. And he's just coming into the NFL and figuring it out. And what's going to happen if Malik Neighbors doesn't have big numbers? Everybody's going to say, well, the Giants quarterback play sucked. It's not Neighbors' fault. Mm-hmm. So what pressure is he really under? Okay. But I am looking forward to seeing Wan'Dale Robinson if Wan'Dale Robinson can put together a healthy season. I think that Wan'Dale Robinson is a better player than people give him credit for. I think he was just coming into his own as a rookie, just figuring it out when he got hurt. I think that last year, I think you and I both talked to him at the end of the season, and he didn't want the season to be over because he said he was just really feeling 100%. He was just really beginning to feel like himself. I want to see what he can do, with a guy like Neighbors who can stretch the field, with a guy like Neighbors who will probably draw, the attention of the number one cornerback, if not a double team, and that should create more space for Wan'Dale Robinson to operate. That's been the one thing I think in Robinson's game, if you look at it, that's been lacking is the yards after catch so far. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do, with that extra space and with two healthy legs. So for me, that's the guy that I'm really looking forward to as being a difference maker beyond Neighbors.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he's very underrated, flying under the radar, but he's a guy who could potentially have a big season for the Giants. All right, Ed, let's talk about the defensive side of the ball. I think the number one question we probably can both agree is the top question is quarterback 2. The Giants, they say they have confidence in Cordell Flott, but meanwhile, they tried in the offseason to sign Tre'Davious White. There was another guy they tried to sign. I can't remember the guy's name. He was from the Jaguars. And then it came out today that the Giants had interest in Steven Nelson, who just announced his retirement. What does that tell you? I mean, do you feel like the Giants are sincere, or are they just saying, okay, you know what? We couldn't get anybody in the meantime, so we're going to roll with the best option that we have?
I think you've got that right, Patty. I think they're going to roll with the best option that they've got. And it's funny because even before Darren Waller officially announced his retirement, I was getting the, how do you want the Giants to spend the money question? How do you want them to spend the money? And I'm of the belief, Patty, that look, if there's a cornerback out there that they want, and you and I both saw the report that the Giants had expressed interest in Steven Nelson, before he decided to retire. But, that shows you, as you said, that they're continuing to look at the market. They're continuing to look for upgrades. And it won't surprise me if they look for upgrades, right up until week 1, when, right up until roster cuts are made. Until such time, they have to express confidence in Cordell Flott. They have to express confidence in Nick McLeod if they put McLeod on the outside. They have to express confidence in Trey Hawkins because, what other option do they have? Does Brian Daboll and does Shane Bowen sit there and say, oh, God, I hope they throw the ball to Deonte Banks' side, because if they throw it to the other side, we don't have a chance. You can't say that. So, the thing about Cordell Flott that is stunning. Cordell Flott is the second youngest player on this roster still. There's the only player younger than Cordell Flott is Malik Neighbors. I think actually that, there are 3 or 4 guys who are 22 and the birthdays might be a little bit different, but Cordell Flott is one of those guys who's 22 years old still, younger than most of the rookie class. So that's pretty amazing. I think the Giants still have to feel like, and because of age and all of that, I think they still have to feel like there's a lot of upside there. And yes, you hear my dogs?
Yes, I can hear your dogs.
My wife just got home, so the dogs are saying hello. They never do that to me, Patty.
Well, that's because they don't like you.
No, they just look at me like, oh, that's you, and go back to their little perches where they were asleep before I walked in the door. So
funny story, real quick. As people probably know, I have a new dog. I've had her for now a little over 6 weeks, and I came back from an errand this morning, and she was jumping all over me and wanting me to pick her up. So I picked her up. She's a Shih Tzu mix. She's 49% Shih Tzu. We found out. So I picked her up and she's wiggling around and kissing me and barking happily. And I'm like, wait a minute, you never do this for me. You always do this for my husband, for your daddy. And she was just attached to me. It's funny. She's sitting under my desk, nice and quiet, monitoring this whole thing. My little supervisor, as I call her. So all good. We love dogs on this show. I mean,
yes,
at least I do. So.
Yes, we do.
All right, Ed, getting back to our discussion. The Giants defense, obviously a much different look with Shane Bowen. The emphasis is going to be on getting the pass rush home with the front 7, probably a little less man coverage, more zone coverage and whatnot. Based on what you've seen, and I know that obviously once the pads go on, we'll be able to fully tell, but what you've seen so far, how do you think that transition is coming along?
Well, all I can tell you is that Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeaux have been spending a lot of time in the backfield, and whether that's because the Giants, in a lot of cases haven't been using their starting tackles or whatever the reason, they've been spending a lot of time in the backfield. Patty, for me, it's interesting because I don't know how it's all going to work out. But for me, with the edge guys, you know, with Thibodeau, with Brian Burns. Azeez Ojulari is a second-round pick who's now the third guy. Had 8 sacks in his one healthy season. So he's still a good pass rusher when he can get on the field. For me, this feels more like a traditional Giants defense, which is built off the front 7. You know, the Giants' recent championship teams have been built off pass rush on defense, built off front 7. They haven't had fantastic secondaries. It just feels like a defense that's being built the way that Giants championship defenses of, you know, fairly recent lineage have been built. And I'm not saying that this will be a championship defense. It just feels like it's being built that way.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, we have final thoughts coming up with Ed Valentine as we get you ready for Giants mandatory minicamp starting Tuesday. Practices Tuesday, Wednesday. Don't go anywhere, Giant fans. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Trennan, with special guest Ed Valentine, and we are getting you ready for New York Giants mandatory minicamp. It's the last football activity of the spring. Then we go off for 6 weeks and do whatever it is we're going to do. Ed, I don't know about you. I'm going to take a little time off, and then it's back to the grind with training camp. The Giants set to open up training camp July 24th, I believe, and going to be a very busy one. And Ed, one of the topics, you know, again, just sticking with the bigger picture thing, is the play caller. Brian Daboll's been doing it pretty much all spring, at least from the practices we've been allowed to see. How much sense do you think it makes at this point for Daboll to take that over versus staying consistent with having Mike Kafka doing it?
Patty, I think it makes all the sense in the world. And I know that, you know, it's a step back for Mike Kafka. It's a step that they can make him assistant head coach. They can say they're giving him all these other responsibilities. It doesn't help Kafka at all in his effort to become a head coach at some point in time. But when you look at it, I'm one who always is in favor of the head coach being a CEO. I love the CEO head coach. I like the guy who's got his finger on the pulse of everything. I think the Giants made the right decision initially as Brian Daboll sort of got his feet wet and figured out how to be an NFL head coach, to, you know, when they could bring in a guy like Kafka with the talented, you know, a talented rising coach like Mike is, and let him do that job. I thought that was right. But Brian Daboll's under some heat here. Now, I don't know if his seat is warm enough that he would lose his job at the end of this year. I think we have to see how the year plays out, you know, and then we'll know, because 3-14 is a lot different than, say, 8-9 or 7-10 or whatever. But we'll see how it plays out. But I absolutely think that at this point in time, it's the right thing for Daboll to do. The offense, even in their playoff year, wasn't fantastic. Toward the end of the year, it was better. You know, Daniel Jones had a couple of really good games, including the playoff game against Minnesota. But the offense, more than anything, has been the drag on the Giants, you know, especially last year. And this is Brian Daboll's offense. It's not Mike Kafka's offense. It is Brian Daboll's offense by and large. To me, at this point, he might as well do what he does best. And there's a side benefit to that, Patty, that I'm not sure anybody really has talked about all that much. Remember all of the chatter about him making it difficult on assistant coaches during games? If he's busy, if he's got to focus on the next play or the next offensive series, maybe, you know, we've talked about, can he grow? Can he learn to leave his assistant coaches alone a little bit during games and all of that? Maybe calling plays helps him do that, because he simply won't have time to go yell at everybody.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a small side benefit, but for me, at this point. It's what he does best. So he might as well go do it.
Right. And it's actually a side benefit that I know I've written about, because look, the guy's got to stop popping his cork every time something goes wrong, because that could work against you. And like you said, if he's got to focus on what the next play is, now maybe he doesn't have the time to worry about, going over to the offensive line and scolding them. Let Bricillo handle that in Bricillo's way, and not, over what's the word I want? Not going over the heads of the position coaches. Let them do their jobs on game day while he focuses on getting everything lined up. And another side benefit, obviously, Ed, is if he's going to go down with the ship, he might as well be piloting it.
Right. And the other thing is, we used to chuckle at Ben McAdoo with his face stuck in the oversized play card all the time, and the problem with McAdoo at the time was, Ben, in my view, never really became a head coach. He never really built relationships with the guys on the defensive side of the ball. I think Brian Daboll has already done that. Daboll has those relationships. The players on both sides of the ball love the guy. But you're right. It's what he does best. It's his offense. And if he's going to go down with the ship, he might as well play that card of, this is what I do best. This is what got me the job here. So I might as well do this.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Ed, final question for you. As what we get ready to go through these next 2 days, what's the biggest thing you want to see answered, and what's the biggest thing you don't think will be answered just yet because they're not going to be in pads and doing contact?
Oh, Patty, it all revolves around that offensive line. The biggest question is what we've already talked about, really, is will we see a little bit of Evan Neal at least? Will we, or will we go into training camp wondering if he's healthy again? And the other thing that you wonder about is, there's been reports here and there, and Brian Burns is spending so much time in the backfield, and Kayvon Thibodeaux is spending so much time in the backfield, and this and that. And, that's all well and good, and it's probably true. But there's no tight end in those 7-on-7 drills. There's no tight end chipping that edge rusher. There's no running back in the backfield to pick up that edge rusher if he comes free. There's no ability for the offensive lineman to be a little bit physical with these guys. If a guy gets a little bit of a step on him, he's going to be gone, because first of all, that's a guy on your own team. And second of all, what can you really do physically as an offensive tackle to counteract that? You can't do much of anything. So we'll see. We'll learn more about that and learn more about this offensive line through training camp, through the preseason, and all of that. But it really all focuses on the offensive line. If they can get it right, Patty, if they can just get it right to the point of being league average, that would be such a step forward for this team, and it would give them a chance to compete, at least offensively. So, despite all the other problems and all the other questions and all of that, if you can block somebody, you have a chance.
And I don't know about you, but everything I've heard and seen about Bricillo, I think he's going to get that unit right. I really do. There's 2 ways you can coach. You can coach and be a yeller and screamer and blast people every time they screw up, or you can, take them aside and teach them. And Bricillo seems to be the latter. He's not somebody who's going to, pop off at the mouth at somebody because they screwed up. He's going to take them aside, work with them, and try to get them right. And I think that right there is going to be beneficial to him, because, those guys are not going to be necessarily cowering in fear over getting getting put on blast.
I wanted to say before we close up, Patty, I wanted to say quickly, we had a chance the other day to talk to Jon Runyan. And Jon Runyan's been a good starter in the NFL for 4 years. Not great, but Runyan was asked about Bricillo the other day, and he said, he said, I really knew basically he said he knew he had fallen into some bad habits in Green Bay, that they just kind of let go. And he said, Brasillo has called me out on these things that I had fallen into, and he's making me work to fix them. And that's not yelling and screaming at the guy. That's pointing out to a guy how you can be better. And any NFL athlete with pride should want to get better, right. And I thought that was good. Hopefully, fingers crossed that Brasillo is the answer and that he's here for a while if he is the answer, because that constant shuffling of offensive line coaches and coordinators and head coaches and all that hasn't helped build an offensive line either.
No, it has not. Definitely. All right, Edward, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Giant fans, thank you for tuning in, spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, don't forget, check out the podcast. We'll have reports the rest of the week on after the 2 practices. Written work will be over on si.com/NFL/Giants. And you can also check out Ed's work on Big Blue View and also on his show. I'll be on his show probably, or not probably. I will be on his show if you want to check that one out.
As usual, we're trading, Patty.
Yes,
as usual.
We always trade. It's that old partnership that we used to have. So anyway, Giant fans, thank you again for tuning in. For Ed Valentine, I'm Patricia Traina, and I'll see you tomorrow, Giant fans.